First thing I want to address is, okay, what broke our economy? Was it the Great Recession? Now, the Great Recession, everybody knows what the Great Recession is, right? It's when the Wall Street crashed in 2007 recently, and then after about a year or so, we started seeing massive foreclosures, and we started seeing massive job losses, and for most of us today, that recession is still going on today. And we can see that in the Great Recession, 2007 to today, that the poorest you were, the more money you lost, right? This graph here is showing in between 2007 and 2009, the bottom 20% of households making below $27,000 a year lost 8% of their income in just in a matter of 2 years, while the richest 20% saw only a loss of 2%. So again, it wasn't so much the rich getting richer during the Great Recession, but it was the poor definitely getting poorer, as well as the middle class being further and further left behind. I'm going to jump to this. This shows income growth between 1979 and 2007. Now, there has been some income growth over those last 30 or so years, but who's been getting that income growth? And I think we all know it. People were saying before, it's the 1%, it's the 10%, right? And this shows that the top 1% received 40% of the income growth over 30 years, while the poorest 20%, do y'all see where it says the bottom fifth? And you see that real thin line? 20% of America, the bottom 20%, received less than 0.5% of income growth over 30 years. So before the Great Recession, we were having serious economic inequality. And this chart here, I just wanted to show, kind of gives a long historical perspective, right? That before the Great Depression in the 30s, we had a great amount of economic inequality. Then it went down in the 40s and 50s. What was happening in the 40s and 50s? What was growing in the 40s and 50s? Exactly. That's exactly what I was looking for, the middle class. In the 40s and 50s, out of the Depression, as Nicole had put forward, that the country has been able to move things forward at some point. And in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, a famous economist named Paul Krugman called this the Great Compression, 1941 to about 80, where the middle class was growing. And then after 1980, he had something called the Great Divergence, where the rich were getting richer and leaving behind the middle class. I call that the Great Regression, where the poor get poorer, the middle class gets left behind, and the rich get richer. So the Great Regression, I guess I just feel it's so important to point out, because so many people are like, well, when are we going to get out of this Great Recession? Yeah, the Great Recession has only lasted 3 years, but the Great Regression has lasted at least since 1980, sometimes since 1970. We have decades-old problem. So it's not going to be a sprint to get it fixed. And just some of the signs that I think many of us could talk about from our own personal experience, the signs of the Great Regression, what we've been going through for the last 30 years, concentration of income wealth, stagnating average wages, more work, less you have, shift of costs away from the elite to middle and working class. And I'm just going to highlight, just give you some data for this. I think people think that, you're just talking about what you want to believe, and I just like to show some hard, cold facts that between 1972 to 2009, there was an increase in average hourly wages of 80 cents over 30 years. Now before that, you had about a 70% increase between 1947 to 72. So we've seen almost no raises in average hourly wages in the last 30 years. I'm going to jump right into this. In a way that a lot of the middle class has been trying to deal with this is that, well, if wages aren't going higher, I can't make more money. Well, I have to send another worker into the workforce, right? And so now more and more households that have 2 adults in the household, they're both working. And this graph here, I think it's a very interesting graph. It shows that the single income family in the early 1970s were making about $42,000 in 1970s. And in 2000s, they had dual income families more and more, and that average income was around $74,000. But the fascinating thing to me is, if you look at the orange there, you see in the 1970s that the single family income had about $20,000 in discretionary income. Discretionary income is the type of income you have kind of left over after you paid your basic bills, after you paid, your health insurance, after you paid your mortgage, after you paid your taxes. Then you have some discretionary income, which hopefully you can do some savings, you can do some investment, you maybe can even have a little fun, a little relaxation. So the single income family with $43,000 had about $20,000 of discretionary income. In the 2000s, they only had $18,000. So even though their income had increased massively, their discretionary income, what they had to save, what they had to invest, decreased. And why is that? And the answer is on the graph. It's because fixed costs increased so much. Fixed costs meaning your mortgage, your health insurance, your child care, increased so much, it increased at such a rate that it was higher than what the single income family made 30 years ago. And we saw what wages were doing. And so even sending another worker, even if you had two incomes in your household, you couldn't keep up with all these skyrocketing costs. And so what people had to do, right, is they had to say, well, I guess we can't save like we used to. And you look, again, great regression, say about 1980, you look, savings just going down, down, down. You also had greater economic insecurity. This is a graph of bankruptcies. And you can see that bankruptcies were just going up and up to record levels in 2005, from 1989 to 2005. And then it goes down. Does anybody know why bankruptcies greatly declined after 2005? That's exactly right. Change in bankruptcy laws. See, instead of the American political system saying, wow, the middle class family is having a hard time, they're going more and more into bankruptcy, what can we do to help invest into them? What the political system ended up doing with the massive lobbying that Nicole had laid out was that lenders were saying, well, wait a minute, we're not getting enough money out of these people before they go completely bankrupt. Let's change the law to make it harder to be bankrupt so we can pull some more money before the finances completely collapse. And that was, in 2005, the regressive response to increasing bankruptcies. And then you can see in 2009, with the Great Recession, it started to go up almost to the level that it was before the bankruptcy law because things are so bad. And I think that really kind of encapsulates, I'm talking about regressive economics, but we have with regressive economics, regressive politics, where instead of politics working to help the people, it's helping the corporations hurt the people. And, again, this just highlights that growing economic inequality. I think, we so oftentimes think like we've gotten past the racial inequality problem. I just want to be clear, you can't get past the racial inequality problem with growing economic inequality. It's just impossible. It's not just recently that productivity is going up and compensation stagnant, right? We see, again, since the 1980s, productivity going up, compensation stagnant. So, all of this, I saw this old West Virginia proverb, if you keep going in the same direction, you're liable to end up where you're headed, right? We've been going in the same direction of taking away things from workers, of creating economic insecurity for people, of putting all the rewards of the economy in the wealthy. And when did that happen before? That happened before in the 1920s, during that led to the Great Depression. You can't have, the American economy was most successful when it had a strong middle class. And whether it's 1929 or 2007, when the rich are getting rich at the expense of everyone else, we see a Great Depression, we see a crash.